Welcome back, fellow rabbit hole dwellers. Welcome back to Rabbit Hole Stories. Today we have Christian Moss with us, who is, as you can probably tell from his beautiful T-shirt there, works with Zebedee. I'm loving it, mate. How did that T-shirt come about?
I thought it before as
Yeah,
well.
it's actually one of my favorite t-shirts. So basically, me and the other co-founder, well, one of the other co-founders, Simon, we just Led Zeppelin fans, and we just think
Nice.
after a few drinks said that we should make Led Zebedee t-shirts. So we made these Led Zebedee t-shirts, and I actually quite like it because it's like kind of like a Bitcoin t-shirt, but obviously you can kind of wear it out and about without people like coming up to you and asking you about crypto, which happens if you wear Bitcoin t-shirts.
That's
Well, we've
true.
got like a little Bitcoin mark there with
Oh
Nice.
yeah,
the Zep and stuff like that. So,
brilliant, love it.
unfortunately, we don't sell these because we'd probably be breaking some sort of copyright. So they're like gift only.
Brilliant, mate. I'm a great believer that all the best ideas come on the back of a few pints of beer in a pub, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And actually, yeah, I've got a few of those. Some of my games came from that, so maybe we'll get into that one game specifically, actually.
Go on, tell me.
Okay, well, back in 2000, maybe 14, 15, I was I was in Japan, and it kind of I went to my first Bitcoin meetup, which was actually at the Austrian embassy, which is quite a great place to have a Bitcoin meetup. And we had this whole rooftop, and after. Do you know when you've had a few drinks and you kind of think you see coins on the floor, but that's like the bottle caps, so you go pick them up. Ah, it's a
Right.
bottle cap. I kind of had that, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if like you can make like a geocaching game where you could just like drop Bitcoin on the floor for other people to pick up. So I made a game back then called Takara, and basically people could drop Bitcoin anywhere in the world for other people to pick up, and that kind of took
Wow.
off for a while and then broke because of scaling. And I'm bringing it back though with the Lightning Network. So
It's like a Pokemon Go for Bitcoin, right?
yes, but it came before Pokemon Go. So I
Mm.
was
Ah, you see.
yeah, but it was kind of somewhat inspired because at the time in Tokyo where I was living, Ingress was very popular. So Ingress is what Niantic, who made Pokemon Go, did before Pokemon Go. So I was kind of
Ah, okay.
inspired by that. I kind of saw people playing that game. It's kind of I didn't actually play it myself, but it's kind of like you would like get territories. Like you go out and walk and you
Mhm.
get territories, and other teams would get your territories. That kind of like walking style game. So it was somewhat inspired by that. But then Pokemon Go came afterwards. So but you didn't
Just
get
like
Bitcoin in
Bitcoin,
Pokemon Go.
it was spawned through different ideas, pocketed across all different aspects of cryptography, right? And you just put them all together,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
said you created this game. So
Exactly.
well done to you,
Huh?
mate. Chris, I know we digressed, but
Yeah.
our usual starting point in this podcast is understanding your rabbit hole story, how
Mhm.
you discovered Bitcoin, when it was. And then we just literally go down with you as to what you're doing now and how it's kind of evolved from there. So, Chris,
Yeah.
over to you, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, where do I start? I suppose like
Yeah.
I guess like being, from the UK, I wouldn't probably say I was politically idolized or motivated into Bitcoin from the get-go. I didn't really, have financial issues, right? I wasn't aware. And but I studied computer science at university in the UK. But the way our university worked, they didn't actually have any computer science lecturers. So we got taught by non-computer scientists, and the result was at the end of the course, I couldn't actually do any programming. So I graduated with like a first class honors degree, but didn't like thought, wow, I'm not going to be able to get a job. I don't have any skills. So I went to Japan and taught English, which is what a lot of people do, go to Asia and speak English because you automatically become an English teacher if you're a native speaker. But after work, I just went online, and at the time, iPhone apps were kind of big, and heard all these stories about some kid has made an iPhone app and he's retired. So I went on YouTube and just typed in how to make an iPhone app, and that's how I kind of got started programming. So I tried to make a bunch of games. I thought I'm put them on the App Store, and I'm going to make a load of money. I'm going to I remember the first time I published my first game, I just went to bed and I was looking forward to the next day to see my like financial report from Apple to see how many hundreds of thousands of downloads I got. I got like 4 downloads, and they were probably my friends I told. So obviously I'd missed the gold rush there, but I still, I wanted to be a programmer and I like making indie games. So I actually went to Australia for a few years and got a job as an app developer at an app development company. And this company was quite interesting because at the time in Australia, they had like a 60 Minutes Australia. You know that show? It's like big in America, 60 Minutes. They had one in Australia. And it was about a kid who'd made a lot of money on an app. So this business basically got loads of business. Suddenly they had loads of like farmers and like, like retired people who had an app idea just coming in with like 20 grand or something saying, can you make me this app? And I was a person who made all these like terrible ideas. So I was basically like an in-house app development sweatshop. So I made like Angry Bees, Angry Bears, Flappy Duck, all these kind of ones. But one guy actually came in and he said, "Oh, can you make a Bitcoin wallet and a social network site?" This is around about 2013, and I hadn't heard of Bitcoin at the time, but I had to make this Bitcoin wallet and social network site. So then I kind of had no idea what it was, but my coworker, I just remember he was to the left of me, just kind of spun around on his like swivel chair and had like a glint in his eye, and he was like a secret gold
Was he
bug.
stroking a cat as he was spinning
He was
around?
he was stroking a gold coin or something probably. So because he was like a kind of obviously quite like libertarian and like a big gold bug, so he kind of like told me about it, and yeah, I mean like I know a lot of people are like they say that my first introduction to Bitcoin I was quite skeptical, all this kind of stuff. I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense. Like it's like money that I can program. So my first Bitcoin thing, I made this app for this client, but then I just started to play around with it in my own time, and I actually made a Bitcoin wallet at the time. And at the time, it was the only Bitcoin wallet on the App Store. So um, at the time, Apple had banned all Bitcoin wallets. But as I said, I was like, I had to make. Basically my job was making like apps every week that were terrible and getting them approved by Apple. So I kind of knew. I thought I reckon I can get a Bitcoin wallet approved by Apple. So I made a terrible wallet by today's standards. I sent it to Apple and they approved it, and it was like the only app store on the wallet. So it was kind of like everyone used it for a while, which was very, very scary. I actually, small kind of side note, I actually got at the time like Andreas Antonopoulos was like very popular. He was like kind of the only guy making content, and actually got an email from him. I was like, oh my god, like my hero is emailed me, and it was actually a cease and desist from him. Because
Oh
at the
no.
time, yeah, like, oh, he was angry with me because at the time he was the security officer at blockchain.info, which is now blockchain.com. And I actually let people log in with a blockchain.info credentials to my wallet so they could use their blockchain.info account on mobile. And apparently I wasn't meant to do that. So, but he was cool about it. Anyway, like that's how I got into Bitcoin, and also around about the same time, I also started to pay tax, uh, which I hadn't really done before. So it's like my first proper job. So then I started. I had this great boss who he was like an old school, like blue collar worker who was, I guess, very pro union, probably quite left
Mm.
wing, and then he actually became a business owner. It kind of changed him. And I remember in Australia, you get paid every 2 weeks instead of like every month. So every time he paid us, he'd come with his paycheck, with our paycheck, and he said like, "This is how much I'm paying you, and this is how much you're getting, and this is what the government is taking." So that kind of like I started to think, yeah, why are they taking all this? And then little things like in Australia, they force you to pay your pension. You have to pay a pension.
Mm.
And but as a foreigner, when I left Australia, like they don't let you keep it in a way. So like you kind of get some of it back, and then there's this whole talk. It was like about they were doing quantitative easing, and like I remember people saying that's like it's like a taxation on people's savings, and I never really thought about these things, but all that combined, like me basically starting to work and getting taxed and trying to put money in a bank account and like the interest rate being like crazy low,
Right.
and then learning about Bitcoin, which was this money that I could just control and be sovereign about
So
and
it was
program.
almost
That's how
like
I
a
kind of got
perfect
started. Yeah.
storm as such, though, it was in your life. You were starting to realize
Yeah.
what taxes were, how the state were taking the piss, and all this sort of stuff. So it was all a factor of many things all at once, really, wasn't
I think it's just and you grow up, don't you? Really, and I think it was
it?
probably a big thing that like a lot of people don't notice because it depends on the country, but you don't actually see the tax. You get like paid before, like they take your employee takes the tax out and just gives you the money, and you don't, but the fact that my boss would like every time he'd pay us, it would go in our bank account, but he would show us and he'd kind of let us know that like I think that was like a small thing.
That's an
Yeah,
interesting point because I have that with a lot of friends in Austria and I think in Sweden. I might be saying the wrong country now, where they have exactly that. They say, I have no idea how much tax I pay because like my employer pays it. And maybe a few of them are freelancers, but even with them, they go like, oh, money hits the bank. This goes to like the tax
yeah.
office and
I
I just
mean,
need to survive. Yeah.
it's one of the evils of the world doing that. I mean, there should be some constitutional law against it that like the people have to, I guess technically is transparent and they know, but it's like you slowly boil the frog almost, and people don't realize, and then they realize, oh, I can't really afford the lifestyle I should be getting, and they don't. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
Uh,
having lived in both systems, to be honest, if I have to choose between one of the two, I choose the one where it's all out of the window and paid for, and like you don't have to think about it a year later. Because even now,
yeah,
sometimes I have stuff I go like, shit, why is this an expense on my account? And then you like, end up looking through your whole list
yeah.
of years'
I
work
mean,
and go like, oh yeah, that was that one or whatever it was. So it
I
is a
yeah,
bit of a weird system.
I know what you mean, and I can see why people just accept it, right? Because I am, I'm I have to do my like taxes every year, and I have to like gotta find all these expenses and invoices. But before we went live, we were chatting a bit about medieval history and this kind of stuff, and I mean, I think throughout history, every time unfair taxes were raised, there'd always be like a peasants' revolt, because
Mm.
that's because like the taxman would have to go to the villages and say, "You owe us this tax," and they would have to actually get the people to hand it over, and and I think if we still had that, people it'd be a lot harder to raise taxes, right? Because it's you actually having people physically give you the cash or whatever. But now that it's taken out before you get it, it's a lot easier to kind of do taxes without people complaining or realizing you slowly add like a few fractions of a percent each year, and it's
Yeah.
yeah
Talking of revolt as well, I was thinking earlier today, I was like, how bad does it actually have to really get before people like do something
three
about?
meals, isn't it? That's what they say. If you miss 3 meals, then society collapses or something. I think that's what I've
Mm,
heard before.
right.
Yeah,
It's just, I don't know. It's almost like the system is out of reach for most people. They don't know how to go against it anymore because they're not reporting on things like protests anymore. They're deliberately keeping that out of the media and stuff like that. So, when they control the narrative, it's difficult for
yeah.
people to actually see what is actually really happening.
I think also the solutions that people by default go to are not necessarily the ones that would solve it. So I think when
Yeah,
people's
yeah,
you know
that's a good
cost
point.
of living, or they can't afford stuff, their automatic instinct is to well, let's tax people who have money more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
When then like that not necessarily has the effect they want. I'm not going to get into this, but people have
Mm-hmm.
different opinions, but that could just lead to like those people paying less tax because they leave or find ways out of it, and then
Yeah.
it leads to the government having to like sell more bonds or whatever. So it's it's not necessarily like, oh, we have a cost of living, so let's ask the government to stop printing more money. That's not what most people go to
Mm-mm.
by default.
No, and most people that they don't actually learn in school anything about economics and money.
Mm-mm.
Really, they don't understand what actual
Yeah, I
inflation
mean,
means and things like that. So
That's fair, but I've heard this before, and I used to say that, but I used to think like it depends on the school. But do you want the state teaching that? I mean, maybe they should learn it in a more private school. But
But you were the guy that went to computer programming, and the person teaching you didn't have a clue as to what they were talking. And you went on to, it seems like, the internet and basically self-learned yourself, right? I've got Daniel Prince, his rabbit hole story in my ear right now. I'm remembering that. So yeah.
I mean, I think this is quite lucky for computer programmers. I mean, obviously, if you want to be a surgeon or something, don't go on the internet. They probably won't accept you. But I think the good thing about computer programming is you just need a laptop and access to the internet. And it's, I mean, you don't really need to, like, my first computer programming course was basically the lecturer said, like, well, computer programming is something you really have to teach yourself. You just... it's true though, it's like, they can teach you some concepts, but it's really just, writing code and it not working and debugging it and getting, feedback. So I think that's quite a unique quirk of computer programming. It's, because like, say that you do construction or something, like, I'm learning on the job, oh no, the house collapsed, you can't really do that. But with computer programming, like, oh, the program crashed, it's very easy to make mistakes and kind of learn, and so it's great. I mean, not everybody is suited towards it, but if you are, it's just a great thing to learn because it's free to learn and you can be very independent with it, right? You can work from anywhere.
And it's instant feedback, like you said. You instantly know, oh, fun, it runs, so now I can do the next steps and finally get it together. Or, well, shit breaks. So that's like, actually, It's quite a good life lesson. Either you get it done or you just sit down again and do it all over until it works.
I mean, yeah, and it also really, I think it also really works well with like what we call the scientific method. How your program doesn't work, so you got to play detective, and you kind of have a theory and hypothesis, and you don't think in a biased way, like, what variables do I change to, and you run these experiments, and then you ultimately find out what the problem was. And I kind of find just the type of thinking it can teach you is also quite helpful generally in real life. It basically teaches you not to assume things, apart from that you're an idiot and you've made a mistake somewhere, which is it.
So inevitably you ended up, was there always a gaming interest with you to go down that route?
Yes.
Or was it literally just, I want to create games because, 14-year-old buggers made a lot of money beforehand?
Well, I think also just making games was a really fun aspect of programming because, you can just be very creative with a game, right? I often say that game development is one of the most creative things you can do. As an indie game developer, you can make the music, you can make the story, you can make the graphics, but you can also make like the rules of the universe, of the physics in the game, right? So it's like you're basically making worlds. So it's just a fun way to learn programming. So that was why I kind of like to do gaming. But yeah, like just to continue, I guess, where we left off. So like my first, I guess, Bitcoin app was a wallet. Then after that, I actually made I was making a payment style app called BitPay. I actually called it BitPay. I got another cease and desist letter from BitPay for doing that.
Out of curiosity, do you still have those? Those would be funny to like frame and hang up.
Oh, there'll be somewhere images, I suppose. Yeah, it's weird because I think I had BitPay Australia and they had BitPay America, but they were bigger and had money, and I didn't really. Yeah. Anyway, but at that time, Apple had allowed wallets back on the App Store, so I didn't really want to be in the wallet business. Being a wallet developer is a thankless job. You basically have a load of risk, and it's very hard to monetize. So after the wallets were let back on the App Store, I basically took my wallet down off the App Store, and then I was making an indie game at the time because I had to learn a new programming language that Apple had released called Swift. They decided to use a new one, and somebody had made like a Flappy Bird tutorial in Swift. So I just kind of had to learn this tutorial just for my job because I was making all these apps. So I started to make an indie game, and then I thought, oh, hang on a minute. oh yeah, this Bitcoin thing. Oh, I should really just like do something with this in the game. That'd be quite cool because it's digital world and this is digital money. So the first thing I did in the game was what seemed to make sense is in the game, instead of doing in-app purchases, you could just buy things with Bitcoin. Sent it to Apple and they didn't allow it because you're not allowed to buy things without in-app purchase. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I just really, really want to just put Bitcoin into the game just because it's cool and it's fun. So they have a rule against, uh, you're not allowed to get Bitcoin from a player, but they have no rule against giving Bitcoin to a player because, like,
Okay, yeah.
why would they have a rule about giving people money? You couldn't really do that before, right? So I basically changed it. So when you played the game, after a while, it would send you some bits. We didn't use sats back then; we used bits. So you play the game, and it would just like give you some bits, so some Bitcoin. And then I sent it to Apple, and they were like, "Yeah, we should really reject this, but there's no rule
Yeah.
against it, so we'll just allow it."
They found a loophole.
Exactly. But I mean, it was a stupid idea. I didn't really have any plan to fund it, so I did. I just went on Reddit and put a QR code and said, "Hey, I've got this game. It's on the App Store." Which is quite a big deal back then, right? Because like there's no like game on the App Store that would give you Bitcoin. I said like it's just a great onboarding tool. So here's a QR code. Just any Bitcoin you send to this QR code will be used to send to players. And that, yeah, Reddit funded the game for a while. I should probably go on and see how much Bitcoin that QR code got in total because it's probably a lot, a fairish amount. Actually, a hacker also sent Bitcoin to that QR code. At the time, Bitstamp, the exchange, was hacked, and somebody had figured out the hacker, like in a Robin Hood style, had sent Bitcoin to
Right.
the game, and the game had like money laundered it out. Well, not money laundering because it went to like players or something, but yeah. Yeah, so that kind of like took off, and then eventually that kind of died down. Obviously, people didn't give money to it forever, but yeah, it kind of it worked quite well. And then I just ended up I noticed that people were playing the game more because it gave them Bitcoin. So I started to get the game made more money through ad revenue and things like this. So I just started to give a percentage of the ad revenue back to the players through the game. And that's kind of how I became like a Bitcoin game developer. I kind of quit my day job and then started to make Bitcoin games. So that was the first game, and then I made the geocaching game we mentioned, and yeah, it was exciting at the time. It's like 2014, 15 now, and I had like partnerships with Coinbase and Zappo and Bread Wallet at the time, and we're all kind of like funding the games. And I actually got some mining company gave me some miners to fund the game as well. So like I'd put their logo in the game, and the miners would give Bitcoin to the game and to me, so to kind of profitize it. And it was really great. And then it all kind of stopped working because blockchains don't scale, and the fees went high. So before, when I would just send people like 100 bits for like nothing, right? It was just costing like $5 to do that. So I had to basically change the game so you'd basically get paid out at the end of the month, which kind of ruined the experience. And then it just kind of I just basically said this isn't really working anymore. And at the time, I had a few contemporaries who were also making games as well. So this kind of small Bitcoin gaming industry at the time. And they had all moved to this brand new chain, which has zero fees, which was going to have zero fees forever. But I was a bit skeptical of this new chain because I thought it had zero fees because it was new, not that it would have zero fees forever. But they all moved over to Ethereum. And I remember at the time thinking, well, it's kicking the can down the road. So, but then I heard about the Lightning Network. I kind of saw, murmurs of it. So I thought I was quite lucky that I wasn't really a business. It was just me. I didn't have to pay employees or, all this kind of stuff. So I could just like wait. I like my other contemporaries, they had businesses and, so they kind of had to migrate to other chains or something to kind of keep their businesses going. But I was quite lucky. So I just waited for the Lightning Network to come out, and eventually it did come out. And round about that time, it's kind of how we get into Zebedee, I guess. It's I thought, well, I was approached by Simon, who's the CEO, who was actually a player of my first game, who had remembered me. Well, he wanted to make a Bitcoin. So he thought the Lightning Network was cool, and he also thought gaming was a perfect use case for Bitcoin. And he kind of didn't know like who was a Bitcoin gamer in the Bitcoin space. And it's basically probably just me at the time, because everybody had gone into blockchain gaming, right? So he contacted me, and I was like, yeah, let's do this. And so Zebedee is all about enabling people. I guess selfishly, it's so I could re-release my games with the Lightning Network, but also to help developers do the same thing and really make Bitcoin usable in games. So,
do I remember this correctly? That you guys officially launched as wasn't it a hackathon result or something, like a Lightning event, or am I messing this up?
No, there's a bit of truth there. Hold on, I'm gonna see this. So, when I actually first met Simon, this was a Bitcoin 2019. So it's from the Bitcoin Miami conferences. Yeah. But this one was in San Francisco. It was their first one, and they had they had a hackathon, which was like make a Lightning game. I thought I'll definitely win this because I'm the only Lightning game developer in the world. So I entered it and I won. But then I met Simon for the first time in person there. So we were going to do it already, but we actually kind of met there. And obviously this kind of accolade helped with investment and stuff. You know, we got like Simon, who was he worked at Bitstamp, and he'd also handled some large like gaming acquisitions and stuff in the gaming space. And then I was the Bitcoin gaming champion or whatever, right? So yeah, that's true. So it's kind of true. But I think we officially announced ourselves in the Bitcoin in the Lightning conference in Germany, the first one, the first and last one, I should say.
They had to cancel a few times, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's tough trying to do a conference in a bear market, unfortunately.
That's true.
But yeah, so that's how we kind of started, myself and Simon, and then not soon after, Andre also came on, who is our CTO. And he came from he pretty much came from the Chain Code residency, so he was like the star pupil there, and he came on board. And I mean, the three of us together work really, really well because Simon knows the business world, and I'm glad I don't have to like get my hands dirty with that kind of stuff because it's not my language, let's say. Andre is just like a superstar developer. He's just great at like making projects scalable and working with big teams. He'd worked for like kind of big tech kind of companies before, and I'm kind of the gamer, I suppose. So I understand game development as well. So us three together really made us a strong kind of foundation for the company.
I mean, you started just tinkering around, doing your own thing, putting up a QR code on Reddit, and then just going with it. And this is all pre kind of Lightning and anything like that. And obviously, as the incentives in Bitcoin grew, the fundamentals were starting to shine, and people started to be onboarded, the more opportunities opened up for you as well. And this is what's obviously created this whirlwind of a journey for you in Zebedee. That's amazing. That's a great story. And so, what's next then for you guys? What's going on in the future? Is there anything that you can tell us? I know there's some things that you're probably working on that you can't, but what's the future vision for Zebedee?
Yeah, I mean, so we have the problem is we have too many ideas and visions. I mean, like it really is. It's kind of it's like a lot of low hanging fruit at the moment. But I'm particularly quite excited about like gaming integration with Nostr. And we actually obviously so with Zebedee, we are like we're B2B, but we're also B2C. So we have like an API and toolkit that developers can use to kind of send micropayments to players and let players like have a virtual economy. But we also have a consumer-facing Bitcoin wallet, which is more than just a Bitcoin Lightning wallet. It's also like a kind of an app, a portal. So it has Nostr built in. So you basically have a seamless integration with your Lightning wallet and your Nostr client. So the next step is then obviously to improve the integration with gaming. So I actually have a NIP myself, NIP 77, which will allow games to kind of link with Nostr. And what we see it already, but this will make it a lot smoother. The kind of circular economy. So, for example, you'll play a game, and that game will give you some sats, and with those sats, you might zap somebody on Nostr, or on Nostr, you might like make a nice post, and somebody zaps you, and with those sats, you can use them in the game. It all kind of flows seamlessly. So that's kind of I'm quite excited about that because this is actually probably quite interesting to the listeners. I spent I don't go to many Bitcoin conferences as much anymore. I obviously trying to focus on gaming conferences because Zebedee is trying to it's quite easy to sell Zebedee to the Bitcoin crowd, right? It's somewhat preaching to the choir, but we really need to onboard gamers, right? And that's a lot more than Bitcoiners. So I go to a lot of Bitcoin conferences, and unfortunately, a lot of gamers, they have a quite hard time getting on board with Bitcoin for a couple of reasons. Like you think it'd be obvious because Bitcoin is a virtual currency and games have virtual currency, so you'd think it'd be fine. But gamers have PTSD. What I found. Probably you guys remember games before free to play. I suppose you'd buy a game and you'd own the game, and the game would be complete. And then free to play came out, which made gaming, especially mobile gaming, very accessible to everybody. But then I think gamers felt kind of cheated, like they'd buy a game, and to actually complete the game, you'd have to spend like a lot more than the game would cost if you bought it outright. So instead of paying $50 for a game, now to own everything in the game, you end up paying like $200 or $300 or even $1,000 of like loot boxes and in-app purchases and all these kind of things. So gamers were super they felt like, game developers are just trying to trick them, and it's like a cash grab. So they kind of were getting over that. And then blockchain gaming came, which is kind of like, hey, buy this NFT, and they're like, wait a minute, we've seen this before, and they got super skeptical because they thought it was like another kind of cash grab. You're going to make me buy this thing and it's going to be worth nothing. So that kind of like burnt them again. And then like when you come and talk about Bitcoin, they just see it as NFTs and crypto and Web3. I should also say, I'm not actually super against NFTs. I actually do have a history with NFTs. So I'm not super against it. And I actually have had, in 2014 and 15, I was doing like NFTs on counterparty with Bitcoin. I think it can be done right, but it's very hard to do it right, and it mainly just comes off scammy, and people get ripped off, and gamers don't like it. So that's kind of like what we kind of saw with like trying to sell Bitcoin to gamers. And then you also had this other angle where I think this is temporary, but a lot of game developers and players would just say, "Oh, Bitcoin is bad for the environment." It's funny because a lot of gamers aren't particularly like what you would call progressive or woke in a way. But if you go to game conferences, that's where all those kind of more liberal gamers, let's say, kind of hang out. So they're all like super, anti-Bitcoin because of the environment, which is strange. I remember having a conversation with somebody at a game conference, and they're like, "Oh, Bitcoin's bad for the environment, and I'm not interested." And then a few minutes later, they were talking about the 3,000 watt graphics card they just bought, so they could play 60 frames per second, 4K or something like that. So there's those two kind of things getting into it. But just to tie it back in, gamers are kind of like Nostr, and what we actually see that Nostr is actually taking off with people who have hated Bitcoin. A lot of the developers, especially in Japan, funnily enough, which which a lot of people in Japan didn't really like Bitcoin. They're not really interested, but they super like Nostr. And so I kind of feel like, and Nostr is built by Bitcoiners, but it's not a Bitcoin protocol. It does have Bitcoin integration. So I think it's actually quite a cool way to to get the gamers on board, because gamers love like Discord and social and all this kind of stuff. But I think Nostr is really quite exciting. And then, you know, once they start to get zapped, you know, like, I hate this bit. Oh, money. I'm not sure. So I'm actually quite excited about that. So, and at Zebedee, we actually, so Fiat Jeff has worked with us for a long time as well. So we're quite lucky to have like him on board to really help us do Nostr well. So yeah, I'm quite excited. Basically, releasing some gaming and Nostr integration tools and this kind of thing, and see what game developers come up with and how they can use Nostr creatively to kind of extend their games.
And I guess it's really the number one thing is it makes Bitcoin sociable, because you can invite your friends and you can show them like, oh, you know, if you do this and that and you get zapped, like, there you go, free money. Or I guess it's also a cool way to monetize your gaming content, because often what do? They stream, they maybe upload it to their socials, but there's never an incentive as a follower to like pay them unless I live stream with them. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. So like we actually have a streamer tool app at Zebedee that you can use to put a QR code on your kind of Twitch stream or whatever to get sats. And I mean, like, gaming is so much bigger than just playing a game now. Like, so my wife's a massive gamer, and she spends more time watching other people play games than she does play games. And when she is playing a game, she's like has somebody else playing a different game on the side. Right. So I mean, and you know, it's really quite. I know like a lot of those people monetize with like YouTube super chats and this kind of stuff. But I mean, yeah, I think Nostr and stuff opens up a whole new level. And I think it's also important to talk about one of the biggest challenges with Bitcoin gaming is the current gatekeepers are kind of not allowing it to flourish. Mm-hmm. So Twitch won't allow you to directly like make a kind of Bitcoin style bot, because they have their own like Twitch gems or something like this, right? And like Apple allow Bitcoin apps, but they heavily shadow ban them, and they don't really allow it. They say they allow it, but it's really, really hard to get an app approved. And when they do, they're not going to allow it to be featured on the App Store. And Steam don't allow Bitcoin apps at all. So it's really, really kind of hard to kind of like, you know, we really need like a Bitcoin game to go viral, but games go viral on Steam and the App Store. So if that's impossible, then it's really going to be hard to break out. So these other kind of other platforms that, like, if Nostr can grow independently of Bitcoin, you know, but then that would allow, you know, people to scale, you know, the visibility of Bitcoin games and apps. And I think that's really quite powerful.
And you've got the likes of Mary Masuwen in the space now, who does a lot of live streaming and orange pilling people at the same time she's playing the game and stuff like that. So, you know, as Bitcoin adoption grows, the more gamers or hardcore gamers are going to come on board, right, and start to put the signal out there amongst the other community, surely.
Yeah, I mean, like, I also, like, I kind of don't like the term Bitcoin games as well, because it is a bit cringe, you know, like, I'm a gamer and, like, you know, like, sometimes I you know, I want to play a game and I don't necessarily think this game should have Bitcoin in it, you know. Some games definitely should. So we have, we're working with Satlantis, who have a Minecraft server with Bitcoin. I think that kind of makes sense. You have like an economy and trading, but like certain games, like I think, you know, maybe it's a bit cringe, but I mean, but if you have like a Bitcoin integration that's more, it's not a direct integration, but it's more like it's integrated with the streaming or the comments or the chat, the kind of like a more ecosystem. I think that's a much more gentle and natural way to kind of integrate it. And I think like even Mary, I think what she does sometimes is, because there's not that many Bitcoin games, so she runs out of Bitcoin games that she can play. So she probably is playing like non-Bitcoin games, but using the kind of Bitcoin streaming tools to kind of, you know, make it work with Bitcoin, right? You know, so, and I think that's probably the way that it's going to scale in the short term, at least, because, you know, like we do have a lot of developers making Bitcoin games on Zebedee, but I think it's going to be a few years until we see like AAA companies like or Call of Duty adding it, right? But if you want to play like the new Final Fantasy or something, but with Bitcoin, you can stream it and then like have a tip bot or these kind of things, or integrate it with Nostr, like like upload the screenshot of what you've done in the game, and then people will zap you. I think that's probably the larger proportion of the kind of Bitcoin engagement.
And it also differentiates Bitcoin games in quotation marks for the audio listeners to the typical blockchain games. Because what's the number one thing you hear on the blockchain games? It's play to earn. And that's sort of it looks like that's the whole innovation taking place there. You go like you play this game for 5 minutes and you go like, well, right, okay, I can see how it may work, but like, what if 8 billion people play it, right? And you guys really offer a suite where creators and gamers can take advantage of it. So is it therefore Zebedee Social? Is that because you said Fiat Jeff also worked with you guys? Is that like the purest form of how he envisioned a Nostr client, or wasn't he that much involved in the designing and ramping up of that?
I mean, I can't really speak for him, and it was Fiat Jeff, also I think Ben Ark as well with Diagon Alley kind of stuff. I wouldn't say that Zebedee Social is like the purest form of Nostr. But the thing about Nostr is it's a protocol, so it allows clients to make different versions of Nostr. So like, I mean, I'll be completely honest here. Like, so Zebedee, we are like a regulated company, and we're appealing to gamers, and we want to work with like real gaming studios, which means we're not going to have a fully open Nostr where people can post whatever they want, right? Because we're on the app stores, this kind of stuff. But the Nostr protocol allows for those type of companies to kind of make a more curated Nostr. But also, if you want to go and like post something that is more political or whatever, you can use your same Nostr key to run a different app. So I mean, I don't speak for Fiat Jeff, but I think that's more the power of Nostr. It's like one criticism I hear from Nostr is like, well, it's a valid criticism. It's like, well, what happens if I lose my, private key? I've lost my identity. Funnily enough, I actually spoke. I was with Ben Ark at a pleb fest a few weeks ago, and I actually said, hey, I've got this great idea for a NIP where you can override your hot wallet Nostr key with like a cold storage key on a hardware wallet, so if it gets hacked you can like change it, and apparently there's a NIP for that somewhere. But anyway, having said that, there are going to be a certain type of people who they want to go to support, and shout at somebody, right? But Nostr allows you to make a custodial Nostr client, right? So so you kind of get a spectrum of Nostr, but they can all talk to each other, right? It's like email, so if I use Gmail, technically I can still send an email to my own self-run email server, right? But so.
And I guess the whole criticism, this is maybe also criticism we on the show often make towards the Bitcoin community as a whole. We waste so much time. I remember, was it Odell who like called you guys out on Nostr for going like, yeah, this is like, closed source, I don't know, Nostr client?
Maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, he has a few of those rants throughout the week. And I kind of read it, I was like, who gives a shit? Because like, it's like you say, some people are just not capable of saving their Nostr key. Present company included. I lost my first Nostr account because I lost my private key. I went like, fuck, I have to do a new one.
Yeah.
So I think that whole argument, sometimes we lose a bit of scope there in the community. And that's what I like what you guys do, because I literally have friends who I went, okay, instead of showing them, the typical Lightning wallets, I said like, go with Zebedee. You don't have to do the KYC thing. It's up to you. But like, use it and play around with it, because you immediately from the get-go have options to actually use Bitcoin in a different way than just, saving, holding, and spending it.
The good thing about Lightning is we don't have to require KYC for low amounts. So to people to get started, they can just kind of play and get some sats without having to KYC. But I completely understand, like, unfortunately, because we really want, like, my dream is to kind of, get some AAA game that has billions of players, like, giving people Bitcoin, and that would be very powerful. And that's not going to happen unless you are like regulated in all the various jurisdictions. But luckily, like I said, because it's small amounts, we don't actually have to KYC people unless they want to like send large amounts, But for most casual games, they don't really hit that limit. Having said that, I'm really quite like people like, I think like the Bitcoin policy UK. I think there's a lot of, I mean, I think we need to, I am concerned about regulation getting worse and worse. So I kind of, hope that we can also be positive and also convince lawmakers to, show like, look, like nobody's going to be laundering money with like sats and like for small amounts in games. Let's just leave the people alone. We don't need to collect their information, and I hope it stays that way. But I understand if people don't want to use Zebedee, but we're transparent, So, but luckily with Zebedee, I mean, you can also use a lot of our games with like your own Lightning wallet. Like, so Fountain is powered by Zebedee, and you can get paid out to your own node of Fountain, right? So you don't have to use the Zebedee wallet, Nice. But we just so we have our Zebedee wallet, and it's custodial, but that's how we onboard gamers, unfortunately, right? I mean, and most people like use like wallet of Satoshi is like the most popular Lightning wallet. It's a great onboarding thing, and maybe in the future, like some of the stuff that Phoenix Wallet's doing is really cool. But yeah, I mean, just for I think most of the more hardcore Bitcoiners I know who like run their own node and all this kind of stuff, quite a lot of them got started in a custodial way just to get onboarded, and then eventually they got educated and had to do their tax return. Like, oh damn, I should maybe make it non-custodial so people don't know about it. Anyway,
Exactly.
Definitely. And it goes back into even your story with like you got told computer science but actually had to learn it. Having that learning curve on your own, isn't that what's the idea behind it, And everyone makes mistakes or has the first touch point in a different way, so I think we should be a bit more chill.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what, like one of my like initial, I guess, it's probably one of my motivations with putting Bitcoins in games originally. I just thought it's a really easy way, because when I got started, the only way to get Bitcoin was via Mount Gox. And then soon after that they closed. So it's very hard for people to get Bitcoin. So I always thought like in my first game, like, oh, if you just want to learn about Bitcoin, it's like people they realistically had two choices. They could either like go on an exchange and KYC and buy Bitcoin, or they could play my game and just get a little bit of a Bitcoin tip and play around with it and no KYC. So I always saw gaming as like the non-KYC people, just to get people introed into Bitcoin. They only get a small amount, but a small amount is all you need to start to learn. If you don't have that, people are going to have to end up buying Bitcoin on, they're going to go through buying it on Coinbase and all this kind of stuff. And that's like the first intro to Bitcoin is going to be directly KYC'd. So I always see gaming as a great low risk way. You don't have to upload your passport just to get started with a small amount. And if you lose it, if you go on Coinbase or something, and you buy like $100 of Bitcoin and you lose it, you'll be quite angry and like, it might turn you off. But if you just get like 1,000 sats or something, like you've learned about it, and if you lose it, like it's 1,000 sats. I'm not as I'm not as hurt by that. Anyway, that's kind of what I saw. But everybody has their own different journey, into Bitcoin, and I'm just speaking from a gaming perspective.
It's very true. We all have our own journey into Bitcoin. And as you know, Chris, as everyone has heard, all roads lead back to Bitcoin. So we've started to play this little game at the end of each of our episodes. And that is giving our guest a word or a topic, and then they've got to try and relate that back to Bitcoin somehow. So Joel and I had
the games, but
Joel and I thought of the word during our conversation here, and we agreed upon rock band. I'll give you a bit of thinking time if you need it. But how does rock band relate back to Bitcoin?
Oh, I can answer this one. So there's a famous interview, I can't find it, with David Bowie. And somebody asked him, is this like in the 90s or something? And he said like, if you were young now, would you be in a rock band? And he said, no, I'd be a computer programmer. And I always, and he recognized that. I kind of think like, Bitcoin is like the punk and rock and roll. Like, I mean, I'm the same. Like, I've got like guitars here and all this kind of stuff, and like I used to have long hair, and you can see by my t-shirt, I really wanted to be in a rock band, but I really wanted to be in a rock band in the 1970s. I mean, being in a rock band now is kind of like, what, you're going to be on Spotify? That's cool. But I think being like a cypherpunk programmer is really like the new rock and roll and punk. And like rock bands, they wanted to make music, they wanted to change the world, change how people think, snap people out of their current thinking, and I think that's what Bitcoin does now. So yeah.
I think that's a perfect answer, and we've still proven that all roads lead back to Bitcoin. So thank you for that, Chris. And guys, thank you for joining us as well. I hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll put all of Chris's socials and all the links to Zebedee and things like that in the show notes. So make sure you go and check that out. And Chris, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Had a great time.